Dr. Ahmed, if you need me to stay after. Okay.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. نحمده ونصلي على رسول النبي الكريم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين. قال الله تعالى في شأن حبيبي إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. اللهم صل على سيدنا مولانا محمد وعلى صل على سيدنا مولانا محمد وبارك وسلم عليه صلاة وسلاما عليك يا سيدي يا رسول الله. We've been talking about the Battle of Uhud, and inshallah we'll wrap things up on this today. Last week we got to the point where the companions, Rasulullah along with the companions, had returned to the city of Medina Munawwara, and this was Saturday, late Saturday night, the 15th of Shawwal. And the companions, when they would come back from an expedition, they would wait in the masjid until Rasulullah ﷺ gave them orders to go back home or whatever else. So they're waiting. And when he comes out the next morning, the command is that they're going to pursue Quraysh. When we look at this, it's interesting. You have an army that is devastated. Pretty much everybody in the army is wounded. And some of them, very severe wounds. And the order isn't simply that they're going to pursue Quraysh. The order is that only those people who took part in the fighting in Uhud will be allowed to join this expedition. And not just allowed, but required to join this expedition. So everybody else will have to stay behind. And as I said last week, the only exception to that rule was Jabir ibn Abdullah radiallahu anhu, because of why he stayed behind. He had no intention of staying behind, and if it was his will, he would have gone in the fighting in Uhud. His father is one of the martyrs of Uhud. And so he's the only exception to this. And as I said last week, he had 7 sisters who had no one to look after them. So if something happened to both him and his father, then who would look after them? The hypocrites, Abdullah ibn Ubay, who left the army, they abandoned the Muslims on the way to Uhud with 300 men. He also comes and asks to join this expedition, and he's told no. Because the expectation, of Quraysh's expectation, of course, and also those who were against the Muslims, including the hypocrites, their expectation was that finally Quraysh would come and put an end to the Muslims. And now that they see that that hasn't happened, and not only that hasn't happened, but the Muslims are going to go and pursue Quraysh. So now there's this thought process going on that, maybe we'll gain something. And this is why now they want to join. The thing is, why do you want someone to join you who's going to stab you in the back? This is also why when they were leaving and some companions tried to stop them, Rasulullah said, let them go. There were two brothers, one of who was wounded to such an extent that he could barely walk. He could have come to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and said, Ya Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you know, my condition, I can't go. But he doesn't. You know, when the order comes that we're leaving, he tells his brother, he says, carry me on your back. Which is what the brother did. He carried him. When he would get tired, he'd let him down. He would walk for a few steps. He'd pick him back up and keep going. And so they get to a point called Hamra al-Asad, which is roughly about 8 miles outside of Medina Munawwara. And here Rasulullah tells his companions that this is where we're going to camp. And this is where they laid the camp. He also orders them to collect as much wood as they can. And then when nightfall starts to come, he spreads them all out and tells them to light the wood on fire. So from a distance, anyone looking at this from a distance, he sees this massive army, not realizing that there's only one man per fire. Because again, if you remember, Quraysh came with 3,000 men. The Muslims, after the 300 abandoned, were left with 700 men. Then you had 70 that were martyred in the battle. So 630 men. Of whom, again, almost everyone is wounded. And not just minor wounds. Quraysh came with 3,000. 24 of theirs were killed. You think about the odds now. While they're there at Hamra al-Asad, a man comes whose name is Ma'bad. Ma'bad was from Banu Khuza'ah. If you look at the history of Banu Khuza'ah, it's extensive, but I won't go into that. But just remember this for this part. They were loyal to the grandfather of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they were loyal to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even though most of them at this point aren't even Muslim, but they were loyal to him. And so Ma'bad, who also is not Muslim, he comes and he says to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he says, he says that we are saddened with what has befallen you. It truly saddens us. And we wish that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had done to Quraysh what happened to you. And then he says, is there anything I can do? And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he tells him, he says, yes. He says, Quraysh are planning on coming back and re-attacking because they realize that they have not met their goal. So go and dissuade them from coming. So he immediately gets on his horse and starts riding. Quraysh had camped at a place called Roha, which was basically another 30 miles or so ahead, 30 miles from where Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam had camped. And when Ma'bad arrives, Abu Sufyan is sitting with the leaders of Quraysh, discussing coming back and attacking the Muslims. And the discussion is, Abu Sufyan is saying that we really didn't achieve our goal. We pulled back too quickly. We need to go back and finish this. Otherwise they will be back. Yes, we wounded them, but we haven't put them down. And so as this discussion is going on and everybody is saying, yes, this is what we need to do, Ma'bad arrives. And Abu Sufyan, he knows him. Banu Khuza'ah used to live, or mainly lived in the outskirts of Mecca. So So he asked him, he says, what's going on? He says, I'm coming from Medina. And, you know, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam has amassed an army so large as I've never seen before. And they are all enraged at what has happened to them. And everyone who didn't join him before has now joined him. And they're coming at a very fierce pace. So he says, well, you know, we're considering going back and attacking them. And Ma'bad says, I wouldn't do that. I mean, you know, when I saw them, the rage I had never seen before. There's no way anybody can stand in front of them at this point. So my suggestion is you head back. And even if you do that, you know, by the time you get everything ready to go, you might be seeing the dust from the hooves of their horses. And so Abu Sufyan, he talks to the people and immediately gives the orders, let's leave. And they head out. And when he arrives in Makkah, he realizes he was played. And so there's a man who's headed toward Medina Munawwara, and he sends word with him. Tell Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his companions that we're coming. And when this man arrives and he gives them that, Abu Sufyan said, they're on their way, they said, Hasbunallah wa ni'mal wakil. Our reliance is on Allah, and He is enough of a protector. He is enough for protecting us. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he stayed in Hamra al-Asad for 3 days like this to make sure that Quraysh did not come back. And then they returned. It's interesting, the first person that he came to meet after he returned from Hamra al-Asad was Amara, Nasiba bint Ka'b, radiallahu anha. If you remember, she was the one who initially came or joined the army to give water to the soldiers and to tend to their wounds, but then when the chaos happened, she picked up the sword and started defending Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and was wounded to where a deep gash in her shoulder and other wounds as well. So she's the first that he came to visit, She is the first that he, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, came to visit when he returned. And at some point we'll talk about her as well separately. She's very unique when you look at her. And so inshallah we'll talk about her at some point. When we look at this battle, Uhud, the first lesson, or amongst the first lessons, is the obedience of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran, in various places, he says, Ati Allah wa ati Rasul. Obey Allah and obey the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But the only way we know what Allah wants from us is through the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is why, in one place he says, وَمَنْ يُطِعِ الرَّسُولَ فَقَدْ أَطَاعَ اللَّهَ, that whosoever obeys the messenger, in reality, without a doubt, with surety, obeys Allah. Because everything that he says and everything that he does is in accordance with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants and loves. And so when the order was given for those companions not to move, and then they started to reason with it, you see what would have been a very clear victory turn into a situation where even Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is injured in the battle, along with all the 70 that were martyred and all the hundreds that were wounded. We also see, when we analyze this even further, you look at why they left their position. Again, the clear-cut order was don't move until you're ordered to move. But then they reason with it because they see their companions, picking up the spoils of war as Quraysh are running. And so now their attention left the command of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and looked at the dunya. And they're thinking, oh, we need to go and join them in picking up these spoils of war. And because in the background there's, oh, maybe we won't get anything. Which is interesting, because if you look at Muslim conquest into Europe. Everybody talks about Spain, Portugal, Spain, all of this was under Muslim rule. And then as the Muslims went forward, the Franks finally stopped them. But most of us don't realize why they were stopped. Everything is from the help of Allah. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala pulls back His help, then there is no victory for the Muslims. The reason that the Franks were able to stop the Muslim conquest into Europe, otherwise all of Europe would have become Muslim, was because the Muslims were so busy carrying the spoils of war with them, they didn't have time to go fight anymore. They were too busy trying to make sure that whatever they had collected was secure. If you read the history, that's why the Franks were able to defeat the Muslims, because they had too much luggage. That's why it's good to live like a traveler, because that's what we are in this world. And this also gets back to the understanding, and this verse was revealed after Badr. Surah Anfal. If you read Surah Anfal, Surah number 8, most of it was revealed shortly after Badr. And the surah starts off with يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْأَنفَالِ. They ask you about the spoils of war. And what is the response? قُلِ الْأَنفَالُ لِلَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ. That the spoils of war are for Allah and His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Period. Which is also interesting when we look at Badr. There is one person who was not in the battlefield, yet he's given spoils of war of Badr, like a regular soldier of Badr. And that person is Uthman, radiallahu anhu. Because he remained behind looking after the daughter of Rasulullah sallallahu Bibi Ruqayya radiallahu anha, who was sick. So he stayed behind to look after her and did not join the expedition. And yet Rasulullah sallallahu includes him in the soldiers of Badr and also gives him his share of the spoils of the war of Badr. So for the Muslim, even though the spoils of war are lawful and they are distributed amongst the soldiers, the end authority again is Allah and His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And for the Muslim, he's not looking at that. That should be an afterthought, if a thought at all. And so, it's like Sayyidina Ali, Karamallahu wajh. He was asked about how do you know what your status is with Allah, what your position is with Allah. And he said, simply look into your heart and see what Allah's status is, or what Allah's position is within your heart. When you're doing your religious duties, is the the backdrop or the mindset still looking for the worldly benefit? When the choice comes between fulfilling the obligation or staying away from haram versus, ease and convenience, then which one do we choose? He said, simply look at that, and then you will know what your position is with Allah. He says the ones who love Allah are the ones who tire themselves for Allah. They're always busy with what Allah wants, so that they become tired. Not tired that, oh, I don't want to do this anymore, but fatigued. We get fatigued because, I'm working so hard, doing this and doing that. That the neglect of what Allah and His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam want from us. So we see that, these initial lessons from Uhud. We also see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He shows us the status of those that He loves and how they are willing to sacrifice themselves for Him. Of the 70 martyrs in Uhud, almost half of them were martyred in the direct defense of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They weren't somewhere else fighting, but directly there, directly in His defense. So, there's a saying in English, that the night is the darkest just before dawn. So you see this contrast. When things appear dark, then you see all these lights that come forward. And of course, they are lights because they are connected to the original nur, which is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when they're connected to that light, then they themselves become reflections or rays from that light. And we see this, again, you look at all those who are martyred, and amongst them, again, Amir Hamza, radiallahu anhu. We also see, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about this in Surah Al-Imran, is the attitude that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala likes, that He loves. We saw, and we talked about this a little bit before, how when the confusion came Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves those who are steadfast. So when the confusion happened and everything is, everyone's running here and there. Of course, Sayyidina Ali karamallahu wajh never moved from his position. The first to return is Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq radiallahu anhu. So how they collected themselves and came back to their position. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about those whose attitude was, everything is lost, so why do anything? This is not an attitude that he appreciates. He loves those attitudes, the ones who, when things get rough, they realize what they're supposed to do. And they never give up hope. Giving up hope is kufr. This is disbelief. Which is also why we as believers should always have good expectations of Allah. And this is in the Hadith al-Qudsi, Ana 'inda zanni abdi bi. Where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that I am with the I am as my servant expects of me. Which is why we should always expect good of Allah. We've talked about this before. This is why those people who are always complaining always have issues. Because that's what they expect from Allah. So that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them. And we look at this in Uhud. Even when the situation was so bleak, literally arrows being rained down on them, and still they never give up hope. And then we see the attitudes afterwards, where those, the companions, the female companions who had lost everything, if you look at it from a relation standpoint of the worldly relations, they had lost their husbands, they lost their sons, they lost their brothers. Anyone that would be considered someone who could support them and defend them, they're all gone. But they had no concern about that. Because again, it comes back to their reliance on Allah. They understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as Ar-Raziq. The husband may have been a means, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't need that means. He can create other means. Of course, this is the world of means, the world of cause and effect, so this is how we see things. He doesn't need any means, period. But because we are in this dunya, He does things through means. So the son is being as a means for the support of the mother. But again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the same one who is supporting that mother while the son is alive will be the one who supports that mother when the son is gone. And they understood this. And not only understood this, but they had complete belief in this. And we see their attitudes when they come and they see Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and they see that he is safe and they say, nothing else matters. So long as you're fine, we don't care. And we reflect on ourselves today, and we see that, then we want to know why we have so much problem. This is why. Because our attitude is not the attitude of those who are true believers. Like Umar radiallahu anhu said, he said that during time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, revelation would come and we would know who's a hypocrite and who's a believer. And revelation has stopped, so we'll go upon your attitude. If your attitude is that of the believer, we'll treat you as such, and if not, we'll treat you as such. We need to look at our own attitudes. We look at their attitudes when it came to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when it came to Islam, when it came to everything. And we should compare that to ours. Because we know who they are. We know that these are true believers. This will tell us who we are. So inshallah, I'll end here today. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fill our hearts with His true love and the true love of His beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and his family and his companions, and also give us the attitude of the true believers, inshallah. Those who have not made sunnah, go and make sunnah.